I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity. It says we can't be moral without Big Brother, without a totalitarian permission. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful. It's inhuman.
This is why we should fight. This is what Anthony Johnson said about the video Consider the Atheist, which Aaron Ra put on his channel, and then I mirrored it under mine. And then Anthony writes, "This woman is so powerful, the best 48 minutes I've spent in a long time." I thought because it is 48 minutes, instead of having, because I have the mirror up, I thought I would just tack on to this introduction the part of this video that Anthony is referring to as to why atheists need to fight. Why we can't just continue to sit idle, which is what Madalyn Murray O'Hair found so contemptible about atheists. They just sat there and let it happen to this country. And now here we are. We inherited this from those people, those atheists who did nothing. We have a mess that we need to clean up. We need to fight for our country. We're at a time where we really do need to fight. We have been fighting, and progress is being made. But atheists need to rally together and really fight this. There's now police cars in this nation that say, "In God we trust," on the sides of them. This is wrong. There's states in this country where they're now deliberately putting the Ten Commandments in public places just because they know it's going to piss off a bunch of atheists. This is wrong. This cannot be tolerated in this nation that is supposed to have separation between church and state. We cannot let Christianity strong arm this nation any further. They got to have their way when we had "under God" put into our pledge. They got to have their way when "in God we trust" was put on our money. It's time that they don't get to have their way anymore. They are the majority, yes, but they don't get to have their way over everybody else. They don't get to trample on other people's feelings and rights anymore. Yes, we didn't fight when we should have fought. Now we have a mess. And atheists of today cannot sit idle anymore. We can't afford to sit idle anymore because religious mentality is damaging. It's damaging to society. It's damaging to the world and conservation and the environment. The attitudes toward the planet as a temporary home for humans. That's a damaging attitude. The attitudes that, according to the Bible, some people shouldn't have as much rights as others. That's damaging to society. We need to fight back. They come into our public schools and they try to get to atheist children, and atheist parents don't really have a say in the matter, because it's not part of the school curriculum. It's after school programs, and the kids want to go because their friends are going. They shouldn't be in those public schools. It's time we fight back. We need to fight for our children. We need to fight to defend them and protect them from this evil teaching, the evil teachings of Christianity and other cults, but Christianity is the main culprit. So anyway, this intro wasn't supposed to be quite so long, but I wanted to say this. Anthony Johnson says it so well, and he ascertained this. He came to this conclusion after hearing Madalyn speak. This is why we, atheists, need to fight.
At one time in our American history, we had an entire body of men who recognized this. And this entire body of men wrote a constitution for us which embodied several principles. And these principles broke America away from the stream of history and made us particularly and significantly unique as a nation. These men devised a government which was contractual with the people and which established certain unique features, all of which you know: separation of powers, a grant of specific authority to government bodies with a large residue of the power retained by the people, a curious rotating system of in-office placement which would bring about an opportunity for removal from office on a constant and continuing basis. But none of that was any good, because as they played with these ideas, they came to realize that there was a certain decision which had to be made in respect to religion, theism, before they could begin. So as an underlying platform, they programmed in complete and absolute separation of church and state, a phenomena that had never occurred anywhere else in the history of man. They disestablished the church, and as we review it, we can see it was because, actually, they hated Christianity. Indeed, a striking feature of the times was the evasion of the use of the word Christian in respect to the religion embodied in official national declarations. The Constitution of the United States does not contain one word of reference to this religion, which was then the dominant one of each state of the Union. Article 2, Section 8 was written as an escape clause for those who did not care to be identified with the oath-taking of Christianity. The Declaration of Independence refers in ordinary deistic manner to nature and nature's God, creator and divine providence. And concentrated reading of any documents of this entire era brings one to an immediate realization of to what extent the writers would go in order to avoid the mention of the word Christian. And our national leaders were, for the most part, deists, and included in their ranks were the first four presidents of the United States: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Madison. And they include Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, George Mason, Ethan Allen. Thomas Paine's writings on this matter of deism versus the hated Christian religion were so widely known and accepted by the leaders of the revolutionary movement that they were cited in the arguments before the Supreme Court of that day. Indeed, at the Constitutional Convention, when Benjamin Franklin, being aged, attempted to have deliberations open with a prayer, he was defeated by a parliamentarian move. In 1783, when the same Benjamin Franklin came to Congress with the idea that a Catholic bishopric be established in an American city, the Congress repudiated this idea also. And one of the most wealthy men of the time, in dying, endowed a college, Girard College, on the grounds of which he ordered in his will that no religious person should ever set foot on these grounds. Now, you have all heard of the Treaty of Tripoli, for the matter culminated not alone in that, and many atheists try to wash away the Treaty of Tripoli, but it's important. The famous Treaty of Tripoli was concluded by the United States, and treaties are the highest laws of our land. With Tripoli on February 10th, 1797, and the treaty was ratified by the Senate in June of the same year. And Article 11 of that treaty states as follows, quote, "As the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the law, religion, or tranquility of Mussulman, and as the states never have entered into any way or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinion shall ever produce an interruption of harmony existing between the two countries. But more important, this treaty was followed with exactly the same wording and the same kind of treaty with Algiers and later with Tunis. But the federal government was one thing and the state governments another, and 9 of the 13 states had established churches at the time of the Revolution, and they had them from 1776 to 1784. And although the national leaders then saw the compelling necessity of disestablishment for the federal government, the states did not see it necessary for themselves. And by the time of the adoption of the First Amendment to the Constitution, on December the 15th, 1789, 4 states still retained established churches, and they were Massachusetts, Maryland, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. Now, national leaders were strong in Virginia, and Virginia is an example of how badly those national leaders wanted to disestablish the church. That disestablishment was fierce, and it did center in Virginia. In that state, legislative acts in 1799 and 1802 provided for seizure of every type of property held by the churches. The state took church buildings, church grounds, glebes, real estate, the bells from church towers, church furnishings, books, records of the parish, and even communion silver. Everything which had belonged to the established Church of Virginia on July the 5th, 1776. All properties were sold, and the money was to be used for public purposes. And religion was not a public purpose and did not get a penny. The Christian church was embattled on the national level, but it held on in the states everywhere it could. And Connecticut church did not yield its grip until the new Constitution was adopted in 1818. And Massachusetts, in a constitutional amendment, never separated church and state until 1833. In New York and New England, states' assistance to churches in the form of land endowments persisted until about 1800. But after churches were stripped of taxes from general funds, the churches still were given power to tax their people themselves. A primary principle of taxation was invested in corporate status in colonial days. Incorporation gave unusual rights, notably the power to tax. And it was remindful of the ecclesiastical corporations such as had existed in England and around which the very bitter strife of Mortmain raged. The battle was repeated in America when an effort was made to incorporate the Episcopal Church, and that reached into the national level. And James Madison was the President of the United States, and he returned to the House of Representatives the bill to incorporate the Protestant Episcopal Church of Alexandria, and he returned it on February the 21st, 1811. And it is important to cite his veto message because they hated the churches. It says, quote, "The bill exceeds the rightful authority to which governments are limited by the essential distinction between civil and religious functions." And it winds up saying, because the bill vests in the said incorporated church an authority to provide for the support of the poor and the education of poor children all the same, an authority which, being altogether superfluous if the provision is to be the result of pious charity, would be a precedent for giving to religious societies as such a legal agency in carrying into effect a public and civil duty. I therefore veto the bill. This was followed by the Virginia State Constitutional Convention in 1829, which did not permit the incorporation of a theological seminary by the state legislature. And today, this hatred is still evident in the Constitution of both West Virginia and Virginia, because it is still stated in those constitutions, quote, "The General Assembly shall not grant a charter of incorporation to any church or religious denomination." The Virginia State Constitutional Convention, however, had to take one more swipe at the churches, and it provided that one was not permitted to make a bequest in his will to any denomination or to any particular congregation. Now, Madison wanted his position to be interpreted correctly, and on two other occasions he demonstrated what he meant by separation of church and state. Don't you let anybody give you any business when they say our founding fathers didn't mean it, because you hear this. In a second veto while he was president, on February the 28th, 1811, he returned to the House of Representatives a bill concerning a question of land to be given to the Baptist Church in the Mississippi Territory. And his veto message said, quote, "Because the bill in reserving a certain parcel of land of the United States for the use of said Baptist Church comprises a principle and precedence for the appropriations of funds of the United States for the use and support of religious societies, contrary to the Articles of the Constitution, which declares that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. I veto this bill." He further expressed great concern lest, quote, "ecclesiastical bodies should gain excess possession of property." He feared that power would accompany it, and he particularly feared that theirs might be the land in perpetuity. So he wrote a memorandum in which he said, "In the United States there is a double motive for fixing limits in this case, because wealth may increase not only from additional gifts, but from exorbitant advances in the value of the primitive one. In grants of vacant lands and of lands in the vicinity of towns and cities, the increase of value is often such as, if frozen, would essentially control the liberality which confirms them." And in 1823 he sent a letter to Edward Everett and wrote further, "Prior to the Revolution, the Episcopal Church was established by law in this state. On the Declaration of Independence, it was left with all other sects to self-support." And Madison pointed to a horrible example, quote, "See also the attempt in Kentucky, for example, where it was proposed to exempt houses of worship from taxes." And he deemed this to be an encroachment by ecclesiastical bodies inconsistent with our Constitution and the separation between religion and government. And Jefferson, too, was up in his ears to this. And I have a purpose to tell you all this tonight. Writing to John Cartwright, concerned with a book of Cartwright's, he wrote in a letter dated June the 5th, 1824, "I was glad to find in your book a formal contradiction at length of the judicial usurpation of legislative powers. For such the judges have usurped in their repeated decisions that Christianity is a part of the common law. The proof is to the contrary." And he went on with an elaborated document to show this. Jefferson evaluated his best piece of work to be his bill for establishing religious freedom, which was introduced into the Virginia legislature in 1779. And writing about this in his autobiography, listen to this. Where the preamble declares that coercion is a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, an amendment was proposed to insert the words Jesus Christ so that it would read a departure from the plan of Jesus Christ, the holy author of our religion. The insertion was rejected by a great majority. It's not a very well-known fact that Jefferson was so critical of Jesus Christ that he created his own Bible. He took some blank pages, cut up his Bible, and by pasting parts of the story of the life of Jesus Christ together, tried to make that man into a coherent individual, and he failed at the task. The result was an octavo of 46 pages, and it's called the Jefferson Bible, and you can buy it in some bookstores where the churches don't have control of the bookstores. And this is the point of all of this. Where were the atheists? In 1780, only 4% of the U.S. population were members of churches. In a population of nearly 3 million by official census, there were only 3,000 churches, and very small ones at that. We began our nation as one being specifically anti-Christian. We were involved federally only as worshipers of nature and nature's God. It was an atheist's dream. And so what did they do? And what did the religious people do? I know what the atheists did. They sat on their asses, and they protected their economic security and their tenure in their employment, and they protected their decent reputation by not aiding the deists at all. But the religious went to work. On October the 27th, 1789, the First Presbytery Eastward in Massachusetts and New Hampshire made an official protest to George Washington because there was no explicit acknowledgement of the only true God and Jesus Christ whom he has sent somewhere in the Magna Carta of our country. And in 1793, the year Philadelphia was stricken by the yellow fever, the Reverend John Mason preached a sermon which extended all over the land, in which he declared that the plague was sent as a visitation from the Christian God because he, Jesus Christ, was not recognized in the supreme law of the land. And at this time, the capital of the United States was situated in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the yellow fever came close to wiping out a very large percentage of the population. In 1803, the Reverend Samuel B. Wiley, Doctor of Divinity, University of Pennsylvania, preached and distributed a sermon in which he said, "Did not the framers of this instrument, the Constitution, resemble the fool mentioned in Psalm 14:1-3, who said in his heart, 'There is no God'?" And in 1811, Samuel Austin, Doctor of Divinity, afterwards president of the University of Vermont, preached and distributed a sermon in which he said that lack of recognition of God was the capital defect in the Constitution, which will issue inevitably in the destruction of the nation. And after the death of George Washington, a prayer was forged to have him utter the only references to Jesus Christ in all of his writings. The original letter from which the prayer was manufactured is found in his writings, and the forgery persists to this day in a bronze tablet in St. Paul's Chapel in New York City. And where were the atheists? It has been important to the Christians of the nation to have at least the founding fathers squarely in the ranks of the Christians rather than the deists, and they have rewritten our history. You won't find this in your college, your university, or your library book. You have to go to the law libraries of America to look up the cases in which these items were involved. And the atheists sat while the Christians redirected our entire nation. The religionists began to make their power felt, and legislators were persuaded to pass laws and statutes making first churches exempt from taxation. However, statutes can be declared unconstitutional, and the churches saw that state constitutional provisions would only protect them in their claim to exemptions. So starting then, they tried to change the constitutions of the various states in order to give themselves tax exemption. Up to 1916, 10 states with constitutions adopted immediately after 1780 had no provisions at all for tax exemptions. But Pennsylvania was the first to adopt a constitutional amendment specifically exempting church property, and you know what vested interests pressured for that. Pennsylvania gave in 1835 and exempted the churches. Massachusetts exempted them in 1836. Virginia in 1841, New Hampshire in 1842, and in the remaining 38 states, 13 more adopted such exemptions between 1859 and 1911. And since 1911, the other states have given way and have given tax exemption across the board. So you see, the very first thing that the churches went after was money, tax money, and power, and absolutely always money other than from their own members. And they asked for the power of sanctions for their beliefs, while the atheists sat and did nothing. An established church is a finance church, and the struggle for disestablishment has always revolved around financial issues. And Justice Douglas, in the case of Murray in 1963 in Maryland, defined an establishment of religion, said that in this kind of configuration, the church typically has a place in the state's budget. So the struggle became apparently one then of re-establishment of the churches, and the religious people moved out while the atheists sat on their ass. Without the recognition that Christianity was a major force in the nation, there could not be a call for indirect subsidy of tax exemption, nor could there be a call for direct subsidy. So it was important to transform us into a Christian nation. And the idea of a Christian amendment soon took hold about the time of the Civil War. And this was introduced into Congress to the Committee of the Judiciary of the House of Representatives first on February the 18th, 1874. I want to read this to you. It's important how far we went from 1776 to 1874, and how far we have come from 1874 to 1971. This is what the religious fanatics tried to do then. They proposed to amend the preamble of the Constitution in this wise: we, the people of the United States, in order to acknowledge Almighty God as the source of all authority and power in civil government, the Lord Jesus Christ as the ruler among the nations, and his will revealed in the Holy Scriptures as the supreme authority, in order to constitute a Christian government, form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. Don't laugh, it almost passed. And this stupid amendment was reintroduced 6 times since then. In 1896, 1897, 1898, 1899, 1900, 1901, and don't you know, I'm finding it in America today. There may be another attempt to pass it. The religionists take a long view of history, and the atheists sit on their asses with the notion that religion will someday die a convenient death. Someday the Pope's going to call me up. And he's going to say, "Hey, Madeline, this is Paul here. I want you to know that I want you to take us over. If you'll just come over to Rome here, fly over, we'll give you our political power, our banks, our businesses, our real estate." What's the matter with you people? You think they're going to give up? So what have we now as a nation? This nation that we started out with like this in 1776, listen what we have now. In a nation started with such auspicious courage, the atheists during this time permitted the abuse of Thomas Paine. They permitted the destruction of the works of Ethan Allen, the single anti-Christian voice among the revolutionaries who fought really. They failed to rally under Ingersoll. They permitted Eugene V. Debs to languish in prison. They never even made a memorial out of Clarence Darrow's home. Nobody knows that Thomas Alva Edison was an atheist. Nobody knows that Mark Twain was. Oh, Mark Twain was a brave one. He was one of you. He said, 100 years after my last relative dies, you can publish my work on atheism. The last relative died 6 years ago. The only persons exempt from the draft in America are seminarians. We have chaplains in jails, penitentiaries, in the armed forces, on taxpayers' payrolls. And at West Point, the Army still marches the trainees to church on Sunday. Our money since 1865 bears the legend, "One Nation Under God." Our Pledge of Allegiance is corrupted by it. We must acknowledge God to obtain passports. We must acknowledge God since June of 1966, a new law that's just passed. We must acknowledge God in order to work for the federal government, in civil service, or in any other capacity. And Christ is now an official part of the space program. We cannot adopt children if we are atheists. We cannot join the VFW if we are atheists. We cannot join the Masons. We cannot have our children in Scouts unless we believe in God. And this God means a male, white, American, Christian, Judeo God. The churches are now officially, through a United States Supreme Court decision of last year, absolutely tax exempt in everything they do, real estate, business, and so weiter. And they will soon have their schools completely financed by federal taxpayers. We lost the barricade fight 5 years ago. The Roman Catholic Church will win that hands down. And the only thing that is left in question is, will it be 18 months or 3 years? But in no instance longer than 3 years, because the atheists have been sitting on their asses, doing nothing. We as citizens and taxpayers support not only churches, church lands, church schools, tuition for church children. We support church businesses, which are tax-free, church stock ownership, which is tax-free, and church control of our culture. Ask any woman who wants an abortion. The greatest insult of all is the control of our culture. But, well, after all, I'm only talking about trifling matters. I'm only talking about symbols. And the money that I talk about is a trifle. It's meaningless. What the hell? The Southern Baptist Convention only owns just merely Borden milk, Bemis bags, Mack truck, Huttrig, Rath meat, Fruhoff trailers, Burlington mills, Firestone rubber. They're a small congregation. They couldn't own more. The direct and indirect tax subsidies of the churches by federal, state, county, and city government only exceeds the cost of the war in Vietnam by $4.5 million a year. I'll repeat that. The direct and indirect tax subsidization of the churches by federal, state, county, and city governments only exceeds the cost of the war in Vietnam by $4.5 million a year. It's really nothing. Don't be concerned. Meanwhile, there are more atheists in America than there are Roman Catholics. And they watch the Negroes, they watch those poor blacks striving for ethnic pride. They watch the saved blacks as the blacks struggle for the concept of black is beautiful, for identity. They struggle to ameliorate their civil conditions. And the atheists see the American Indians and the Chicanos and women in women's lib struggling in the battle everywhere for human rights. And the sophisticated, intelligent, educated atheist, who is the doctor, the lawyer, the teacher, the judge, the person in actual control of our society because of his functions in it, the sophisticated, intelligent, educated atheist sits on his ass and won't even do what the lowly black man in the gutter will do. Atheism, the religion of the future? Ha! Don't make me laugh. The average churchgoer today is age 32. He has a master's degree from college. He sends his 2 children to Sunday school regularly. His wife goes 1 day a week extra for some proselytizing church activity, and he is an atheist. Atheists are faceless, gutless, and brainless, and they cannot inherit the future. They isolate themselves from the fight, and there is a fight, and it is in society, not in esoteric groups hidden under meaningless names. My God, the Ethical Culture Society. I mean, who could tell what they stood for? Disdaining to get their hands dirty. And it's a war. It's a war in which we need to reach the mass of people with the sophisticated instruments of mass communication and with some ideas, not in little groups such as this, nor through little unintelligible magazines or through irrelevant issues. As we strive to be identified as everything that we can be identified as except an atheist. Well, I'm an atheist and take a goddamn good look. 180 pounds on the hoof, and I'm proud of it. And as an atheist, I have an understanding that many of you do not have. I cannot take on all of the problems of the entire world piecemeal, the superstructure of our culture, for I have a more important job than that. I work only on the basic philosophy, the floor on which everything else sits. And in a geopolitical sense, and in a long-range view of 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years in the stream of human history from this date forward, that's the important thing. That floor, that base. But this is too big of an idea for the small minds of the atheists of America to encompass. Their interests are not in bettering the quality of human life. Oh, their interest is not in defining this floor, this base, this magnificent life-asserting philosophy. The atheists are interested in job tenure. The atheists are interested in saving their economic asses. The atheists are interested in the pettiness of fear of being known as an atheist. I can't tell my wife. You can do something else to her, really. The atheists are interested in respectability. They are interested in their quiet, outward conformity to the notion of religion, through which conformity they give it support. Religion continues because you support it, every one of you here, and you support it by your conformity with its notions and with your compliances with its demands upon you. And the geometric progression now of religious gains, don't kid yourself when you look at the culture. Religion gains. The gains were in arithmetic progression for some decades. They're in geometric progressions now. And I think unless we have a significant breakthrough in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to fight 1776 all over again in 1976. The First Amendment will mean little or nothing by then. But separation of church and state, the only protection for the atheist or for free man in a free society, is meaningless and worthless as far as the atheist is concerned. He would sell out his soul if he had one. He would sell out his country. He would sell out his family. He would easily sell out the entire human race, and he is doing it today in America for job security and for respectability, and not to be labeled with the horrendous name of atheist. I need therefore to end it as I began it. I was asked to speak tonight on the question, is atheism the religion of the future? No, it's not. Religion will revitalize, and it will come out stronger from this its period of strife, because it has no enemy. The atheist is gutless. Thank you.
Her contempt is pretty obvious. How she feels about the atheists who do nothing, sit on their asses. But she's speaking to the old style atheists, the atheists that I never dealt with atheists really when I was a Christian, and I was a Christian a long time. I never really dealt with any atheists. Nobody ever really came out and flat out said to me, "Oh, I'm an atheist." It was like, "Oh, by the way, I'm an atheist," kind of something grudgingly admitted by a friend that I really respected, which actually helped me a great deal to realize the errors of my ways. Just having somebody that I respected admit, and this was after knowing this person for years, admit that he was an atheist. I think more and more we're seeing a different kind of atheist now that maybe didn't exist so much when Madeline was around. And these are the former believers. The outspoken, the people who are used to being outspoken about their beliefs, because as a believer, it's perfectly okay to be outspoken about your beliefs. Only now we're atheists, and we're being outspoken about our beliefs. Christians don't like it so much when atheists do what they do. It's okay for Christians to speak out about their beliefs, but not so much for atheists to speak out. I think because of this new kind of atheists, which I think there's becoming more and more of them all the time. The atheists that sat on their asses, that, were used to being treated like shit and just kind of kept themselves undercover so they could just kind of get through life without being noticed, are being outnumbered by the new kind of atheist that is pissed off because, oh my goodness, I'm not a Christian anymore, and oh my goodness, this is how I get treated? Wait a minute, I have a right to speak out. What do you mean I don't have an opinion anymore? What do you mean I need to be quiet about my opinion? Since when? Just because my opinion is now contradictory to Christianity, I'm not allowed to talk about it? I'm not allowed to say what I think? There's a lot of atheists who are former believers that are saying bullshit. On the contrary, I worked really hard to get where I am now. I worked really hard and I've read a lot of things and I've learned a lot of things. And don't you want to know what I've learned? Do you want to know what you believe is the truth or not? Do you want to know it's true? Because it did matter to me, and that's why I went looking and why I read books and researched, and why I'm not a Christian anymore. Doesn't it matter that if you're going to latch your identity onto a belief, that that belief is true? I think there's hope for humans. Madeline obviously has a lot of contempt for the do-nothing atheists who sit on their asses. But I think there's a new kind of atheist. And I think every year we see more and more of them. And these outspoken atheists who post those questions boldly and say, look, 1 + 1 does not equal 2 in Christianity. Why is that? And they say, where is the evidence for your beliefs and all your claims? Why is there no evidence? We post this, we say this, we proclaim this, and people are listening. I think there's a lot of progress being made because of the work that atheists are doing to try to change the world. So yes, while Madeline is very negative toward the atheists in general, I think a new day is coming. And I think that atheists are waking up. And I think so are theists waking up. I think humans in general are starting to wake up. The fact that gays now have rights that they didn't have before, that they've struggled for years to have. Christianity, religion, it's losing. But we continue in this battle. We have not won, it is not over. But I think if Madeline could see us now, I think she'd be proud. If you've been watching, thanks. Bye.